Hello, everyone. Welcome back for this new episode of Coding Design System with George. Hello, George. How are you?
Hello, Mads. What's up?
Ah, really a lot of things. We're working on new content for Backlight and new tutorials on Backlight to help people to just um, make their first step in the tool. So that's really fun to do because there is a lot of things to
Yeah,
cover.
very
And
promising. I look forward to this.
yeah, me too, me too. Today it's a really big day, at least for me, because we're welcoming Ben Myers on stage with us to talk about accessibility. Hey Ben, how are you?
Howdy, I am doing well. I am coming to you live from the Dallas area in Texas, and I'm so excited to be here. Um, I have done enough streams where I host a guest, but very few where I am the guest. So I'm super excited to be, on the other side, as it were. And I'm super excited to be chatting with y'all about a subject that I love.
Superb. Thank you, Ben. You're
Yeah, thank you for
very
being here.
welcome.
And it will be it will be the most comfortable side for you today because you just have to chat, and we are
Oh
taking
yeah.
care of everything else. So
If things go wrong, it's not my fault this time,
exactly.
Oh man.
You can relax today, Ben.
Yeah, yeah. That at
Y'all
least for
mind if
this
I
one.
just take the day off? I'll be over there having some lunch, right? And y'all have got this. I believe in you.
Awesome. I said it's a special day for me because the first conference I attended was in I don't know 2008, something like that. So almost 15 years ago, and it was a conference dedicated to accessibility in web, named Paris Web, which is one of the first conferences dedicated to the web in France. So accessibility was always something I had in mind when working, and I'm really happy and really glad to have you today to talk about this specific topic. So yeah, thank you very much for being with us today. Ben, you're working at the MS Tech documentation team. You are working at the platform. That's it. You are coding the documentation
Yeah.
platform
So
at Microsoft.
I work at Microsoft on their documentation, their developer documentation. So if you go to docs.microsoft.com, I'm building out the platform that's hosted on. So that involves a lot of the front end aspects. And we're also, as a team, building out a design system specifically for that documentation, which I think is a really exciting, interesting challenge to do, right? Because um, if you think about like the needs that Microsoft has, and I should totally say, by the way, I don't represent Microsoft. My views are not the views of my employer, yada yada, that disclaimer. I'm not here on official Microsoft business. But I do think it is an interesting challenge to design for documentation, particularly at the scale that Microsoft operates at.
Yeah, it's a
Because
massive scale. Huh?
yeah, it's huge. First of all, we have so many different products and services that all operate very differently. We have so many different audiences, developers of different experience levels, people across the globe who speak different languages than what like I know. I know English. I took Latin in high school, and I've been very faithful taking German on Duolingo. But I would not consider myself a very multilingual person. But supporting like just the wide diversity of languages across the web, and then of course accessibility, right? Supporting disabled users in their needs, making sure that they have just as much access to the content as anyone else might. And so I think it's just an incredibly cool thing to be able to work on and to learn from. I'm constantly learning and growing in my understanding of just how the web can be and who the web is for.
Mm. Yeah, I see. And this is this is definitely something that I guess we are trying to keep in mind when working on a design system because you're just building the foundation of what will become your product after that, and you have to be I guess agnostic as much as you can to be able to bring the most flexible and most accessible
Yeah.
things to your coworkers to build a final product. Is there you mentioned that you use a design system to build the documentation at Microsoft. Is this something that include some kind of UX guidelines um,
Absolutely.
for both development and content production? What about this part?
Yeah, I will say that our design systems documentation is still in its early stages. Where like it's only just starting to like be formalized. But yeah, it includes guidance, not just like here's the CSS classes you need to use, but also, hey, if you're going to do this, if you're going to go for these styles, here's some additional considerations, right? You need to pair this color with this color, or you need to have focus outlines that work against this design, or you need to also consider what high contrast looks like for this. And so we do have a blend of the technical, literal like use guidelines, as well as the if you're going to use this, here's the additional considerations that you need. Because in my mind, like no design system is complete without that guidance, right?
Mm.
A design system that tells you how to make something look pretty is fundamentally incomplete until it tells you then how and why to use it, right? Like a design system has to codify not just the rules, but the context that those rules exist in to empower people to build, understandable, usable, consistent experiences.
Yeah, that's very true. You really need to understand why and the
Mhm.
semantic behind those decisions so that you can really embrace them. Otherwise, it's like anything. Like also, if you tell your kids something is forbidden but you don't explain why,
Mhm.
that's also the kind of same effects.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I think for me, this is very clear when it comes to the parts of our design system that touch experiences that the developers and content creators themselves are less familiar with. So, because I am basically only just an English speaker, right? I don't have an experience of a web that is right to left or, bottom up or anything like that. Like text direction is not something that I'm terribly familiar with. In a personal experience. I've had to become more familiar with it as a result of my job, but it's something that until then was just not part of like my assumptions about the web, you know. And this too for accessibility. If you aren't a disabled user and if you're not regularly relying on things such as assistive technologies, then you likely won't be as familiar with the needs of disabled users and how the stuff that you're doing impacts that, right? So you've got to have extra guidance to compensate for a lack of inexperience there, a
Mhm.
lack of familiarity, so that anyone can pick up your design system and still build something that is as inclusive as it can possibly be.
Hmm. And how do you bring this kind of experience from your team into your design system by documenting, as we said? But is there any kind of process or any kind of tools that you are using to, I don't know, enforce some kind of practices, or to be clear on some guidelines, to respect, be able to
Uh,
use a design system?
I think we're still kind of figuring that out. Like we do have like regular like accessibility audits, for instance, and really importantly, our design team and our um developer teams are closely integrated. We meet pretty frequently, and like discuss and bounce ideas off of each other and just kind of improve things. I Yeah, I think that the general process does steer us towards more accessible and inclusive experiences, but I would love to see that get used and implemented more fully into the design system itself, in such a way that someone outside of my team and even outside of my employer could pick up the system and still benefit from some of those guardrails. I think there's still a way to go for that as well, but that is absolutely something that I would love to look forward to.
Mhm. Yeah, sure. And you mentioned tests and audits about accessibility. Is there any tools that you're accustomed to, or you prefer to use, or you recommend to use in terms of testing accessibility and auditing accessibility?
Yeah, there's a lot. So first of all, I don't think anything can replace manual accessibility testing. I will talk about some of the automated tools, but ultimately, accessibility is usability, and usability is going to be fairly subjective, right? And machines not so good at the subjective part.
Mm.
So manual accessibility testing is huge, and for that, I recommend using the same tools your users are going to be using. So your users are not might be, are using assistive technologies such as screen readers. A screen reader is a piece of software. Every major operating system comes with a screen reader built in. Microsoft, for instance, Windows has Narrator, Mac OS and iOS have VoiceOver. I am pretty sure Linux has one, but I forget what it's called. And there's also additional ones that you could buy or download. Many people use NVDA, and there's a paid solution called JAWS. A screen reader is, I see Michael Chan in the chat. Hello, Lunch Dev.
Mhm.
So a screen reader is a piece of software that will take the state of your application. So typically like a web page, but you got to think about it, screen readers and other assistive technologies as like owned by the entire operating system, right? So you could use it on applications that aren't your browser. They'll take the state of your application, take the state of your web page, and then present it usually in an auditory way. So announce the contents of your page out loud, or some people will pipe the output to something called a refreshable braille display, which is a row of like braille dot style raise or lower, depending on the words that are being announced in that case. Um, Screen readers are commonly used by blind people, people with low vision, as well as I've heard that quite a few dyslexic users will use screen readers as well. So anyone who can't reliably see or read the contents of your site is liable to use a screen reader. There's other assistive technologies as well. The Windows operating system comes with a operating system level setting called high contrast mode, also sometimes called forced colors. And so turning that on every once in a while to see what your site looks like when you strip everything of your brand colors and instead replace it with system level colors that are being defined by their function and purpose and behavior. Turning that on and seeing what your page looks like in a completely different experience, and is it still usable. There's other assistive technologies as well, such as screen magnifiers. That's software that'll zoom into a certain part of your screen. But really, nothing beats going into some of these tools, going into some of these solutions, and actually playing around with it, getting good at it. I like to tell people to become, I like to tell developers and testers rather, to become power users of assistive technologies, because again, your users already are.
Mm.
Uh, and so nothing quite beats manual testing for that. However, there are limitations there, I think. I one thing I would call out is that there are automated testing tools. For instance, one of the big ones is by DQ Systems. It's a tool called Axe Expert or Axe Dev Tools. This is a browser extension that you can install. They'll run an automated scan of your website, and it'll try to find some of the easily computable accessibility defects in your application. These are things like you haven't met a certain color contrast ratio relative to the size of the text. So folks who are colorblind, for instance, or have low vision can't read your text because it's just too small and too faintly colored, for instance. Uh, Automated tests cannot find everything in your site, and it also can't tell you the quality of your experience. So an automated test will be able to tell you, hey, this image has alternative text, but it can't tell you whether that alternative text is good or accurate or complete, right?
Yeah.
So what it's really good for is finding a lot of the easy pickings, things like color contrast, where it would just be a pain to calculate that ratio over and over again,
Mm.
or things like alt text, where it would be a pain to go to every image on your site. So it's good to handle some of those, and it can be really great for regression there. But you have to complement it with manual testing so that you can see what the actual experience is like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your recommendation would be to actually combine and get those low hanging fruits from Macs and or similar software out of the way, and then doing the heavy
Yes.
lifting manually for.
Yeah, because your accessibility testers, your QA team, your developers are exceptionally talented, right? And their time is better spent solving higher level, bigger accessibility issues, not the small fries like, does this color stand out against this other color?
Mm.
Right? Um, if they're constantly reevaluating those color contrast ratios or checking that, oh, yes, these images still have their alternative text and they're still accurate, um, I think that that is something that can be a waste of the time because I think you could funnel that energy towards creating really, really strong user experiences. So, yeah, use automated testing to clear the low hanging fruit and to build regression into your process, but then use your developers and your testers and your designers for that higher level stuff that they're really good at.
Yeah, yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. To me, design systems and accessibility are definitely made to work together because
Yes,
as we work on design system, we're working on small blocks that will be used to build big interfaces after that. So burning the accessibility um, fundamentals directly into the design system means that you can extensively test your components in an isolated manner. So after that, you could focus when you build your big interfaces on something more advanced. But you have already cleared every small glitches that you could have in terms of accessibility directly into your component. So it's definitely I guess a good process, in terms of a progressive enhancement. And if you burn everything into your design system, it would be really easy to develop and to build better experience after that. Um,
absolutely.
is there any kind of checklist or I don't know, so yeah, some checklist of tests that you always run of the different components that you are developing or working to?
So on a day to day, I don't actually end up following a literal checklist. Like I've got a few things in mind. If you're looking for a literal checklist, the one I would absolutely recommend is one by the Alley Project, which I believe is going to be alleyproject.com/checklist. And that'll get you a lot of the low hanging fruit for like common accessibility things. And that I would totally recommend. Um, but for me, a lot of it is how are the color contrasts, right? DQ Systems, which is a web accessibility resource, they put together a lot of like educational resources as well as they put Axe dev tools together. They found that of the accessibility defects that were easily computable by technologies such as Axe, color contrast by far and away like leads the pack in how frequent those issues are. Like there are far more color contrast failures than other computer detectable failures. Um, and so that is something that you should just be extra vigilant of is are you meeting color contrast ratios? Can people who are colorblind or low vision more easily discern between two colors? Can they see your text against its background? Um, I also, especially when everything is interactive, I think keyboard testing, making sure that you can interact with an element purely by using a keyboard is mandatory, as well as the screen reader experience, which is going to have a lot of overlap with the keyboard experience. Um, that's a big part of my testing. And as I learn and grow, I'm constantly adding more things. Like I did not regularly do high contrast mode testing until I joined Microsoft and learned like just how big a deal that was. And
Mm.
now that's constantly a thing. And I've even gone to a couple of my friends' open source projects, like their documentation. I've been like, listen, I know you don't know anything about high contrast mode, but your documentation's high contrast mode is trash. Let me fix it for you. Believe me, I didn't know about this until a week ago, kind of thing. But I'll go in and start like adding experiences for that. So that's now become a part of my testing. So that would be kind of my big checklist right now as things that I'm looking for is how are the color contrast ratios? What's the keyboard experience? What's the screen reader experience? And then as I learn and grow and realize there are gaps in my knowledge, I fill those in as well so that it just becomes habit. And that would be things like high contrast mode support.
Yeah. As you said, that's the power of open source. We could easily contribute to improve any kind of new project. If you find some glitches or some issues with
Mhm.
high contrast color mode or something like that.
And I think
Absolutely.
I contrast now it's supported in Chromium, is it? I'm not sure.
I Yeah, it should be. It's I think the high contrast mode, it's sometimes called forced colors mode. It's one of those things that's very much so like in flux. There was an implementation of it that has since kind of been deprecated from the CSS specs. Um, I've not really been thrilled with any of the options for emulating it on my Mac. Like I still kind of pull out my Windows device and manually go into high contrast mode for that, just to get the like 100% pure experience where possible. Um,
Mm.
so yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking into it. I'm looking into the MDN, and it seems that it's covered by Firefox, Chrome, and Edge.
yep. And
Force,
hopefully
force
support will
color.
improve. But yeah, it's looks like it's not in Safari, but
Yeah,
yeah.
just not yet.
Mhm.
But as you said on the Mac, I don't know how this
Yeah,
is.
Mac support isn't quite there yet, unfortunately. I'm getting a bit of an echo. Is that to be expected?
Yeah, no, I don't know, but I had the same one.
Okay.
Yeah, okay,
Cool, cool, cool.
yeah,
Just wanted to make sure that folks listening in are having a good audio experience.
yeah,
Um,
you're right.
yeah,
Okay, so we plan to do a little bit of coding and
yeah,
try to implement a simple nav. So George, are you ready for this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me show you the
yeah. And
screen.
so I thought we could build a kind of specifically like a top level nav, right? Because I think when we talk about like nav, that's something that can be a very flexible experience. But top level navs to me seem fairly consistent because they've got a couple things going on. They've got a couple of links that are usually like laid out probably in a row. Typically, they're going to be the same from page to page. But then also, it's very common to highlight the current page, right? And we typically end up doing that. Actually, typically, how would y'all go about highlighting specifically the link that represents the current page?
Yeah, you're right. What's your preferred? I guess we will cover it after that. But what's your preferred way to highlight the current page? Is there using attribute, using a strong tag, user? What's your favorite one?
That's a great question, right? And this is, I think, one of the things that design systems can help us out with, right? Is because the fact that this is even a question at all tells me that there's some knowledge that we would probably need to codify in our design system, right? Because we don't necessarily know or agree, right? And so we need to like come up with a solution. So let's first of all build a nav. So I would do this using in HTML a nav element, um, and inside I would probably do an unordered list with some list items with some anchor tags. That you don't need all that structure, but I've found that in many cases, folks tend to like that kind of structure. If you're unfamiliar, when you use a lot of semantics like nav and an unordered list, you it just adds more structure to screen reader output so that users are told, for instance, how many items are in this nav, for instance. Um, so yeah, um,
Yeah, let's do this. Just gonna make sure I can do this. So you definitely we want to start with the nav tag,
yep.
and then how would you uh,
I would probably do an unordered list, and in there I would have a bunch of list items, and we could maybe say like it's yeah, um,
sorry, I'm just
no worries.
trying to organize it so that I'm sure it's working. So you would do an unorganized list
Yep.
and some
Uh,
items.
yeah, and we
And
could maybe do like three, and one could be like, for instance, about one could be like I don't know. I see a lot of like careers pages up in top navs. So that could be one. Um, and so these would likely be like anchor tags inside your list items, right? Um,
Yes. Anchor like
the
this.
A tag, yep. And we'll just set it to be like, yeah, equal to slash for the purposes of this demo. But um,
This. Oh, yes.
what isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Don't worry.
there we
There we
go.
go.
Let's go ahead and add in a few more. So maybe we'll copy the list item structure for an about page. Let's see. And then I don't know, mission. Is that a common one?
Yeah.
Um, something like that. Okay. And let's,
We, we've got a
okay.
nice question from Brittany. Who
Yeah.
is asking, for accessibility, is it necessary to have lists inside the nav, or is just having just elements is okay?
Okay. Um, the answer is always it depends. It is semantically okay to have a bunch of anchor tags or A tags inside of your nav. That is totally fine. It is permissible. Um, if you also have an unordered list, then you will, in most browsers and screen reader combinations, you will give a bit of extra structure for screen reader users. For instance, if I'm accessing this page with VoiceOver and I navigate to this nav, it'll tell me that there are 3 items in here. That's not something you would get without the unordered list. So it's like totally fine to just have the anchor tags. That's totally fine, but you'll find that a lot of people gravitate towards having this nav with a UL, with list items, with anchor tags to provide that extra structure.
Mm.
Uh, and we're actually specifically going to go with an unordered list in this case because I have some things I want to, I guess, kind of show y'all with this. So we talked about like how would you best indicate the current link, right? If we assume that we're on the careers page, for instance,
Yes.
usually I'll see people add a CSS class called current or current link or something like that.
Like
Uh,
this.
and yes, um,
But it's not semantic. That's right.
right. Yeah, because we could change the color, we could change the border, right? But if you're accessing this with a screen reader, for instance, there's nothing communicating to the screen reader that, hey, this is the current page. Therefore, you're providing information to sighted users and not to blind users, for instance, who rely on assistive technologies. So, what I recommend is doing, instead of the class, I recommend doing aria current equals page. So if you're unfamiliar with the ARIA current attribute, actually, or if you're unfamiliar with ARIA in general, ARIA is a. Oh, I'm getting the echo again. Is there
Yeah.
something I can do? So if you're unfamiliar with the ARIA attributes, that is a set of attributes that are specifically designed to curate how an element is presented to assistive technology, such as screen readers. So it does not change any of the functionality of the elements. It won't magically update their behavior, but instead it just changes how those elements are presented to assistive technology. ARIA current is a way to indicate that this element is, it represents the current value of something. There's a ton of different values. Like, for instance, you could do like aria current equals date is a valid value. So if you're like building out like Google Calendar or something like that, you could specify the current day with aria current equals date. But the one I see most commonly is aria current equals page. And what that does is that'll indicate that this link refers to the current page that you are currently on, is the active page. Um, so yeah, if you could set the value of that aria current to be page, that would be great. And then what I recommend is in your CSS, your style hooks can specifically target aria current equals page.
Yeah.
Um, the reason I recommend this is A, I think it is very fairly verbose, right? It communicates our intent here that we're styling something for the current page, but also, more importantly, perhaps, um, it enforces the use of appropriate semantics, right? If you just have a class, like you could combine the aria current with a like current link class, and you could style the current link class, but then someone's just going to do the current link class without also handling the accessibility behavior as well, right?
Mm.
Uh, so by targeting aria current equals page, you kind of force folks to take the proper semantics to get the experience that is the most inclusive. And I think that that is incredibly neat.
Yeah, and if I'm right, targeting the attribute has the same specificity as targeting a class. So
Yeah.
yeah, there is no matter that trying to style element using a class or using an attribute, you will finally have the same specificity. So it doesn't matter, but you take care of the semantic experience of your markup.
Yes. Yeah, and so you can style that way, and so probably this would be in all reality a nav like this would be a flex row probably, right? That would be along like the top of the page. So maybe let's go ahead and do that, right? Because I want to do a couple of other things to our
Like,
little nav.
would you like
Um,
this?
yep. Um, yeah, display flex, and then it might need to be nav ul might need to be your
Yeah.
selector.
Yeah.
There we go.
And then maybe
Probably add like a gap
Yeah.
of say maybe 2M. Um,
oh,
oh,
Um,
oh, it's the
uh,
there's an S in the selector that
oh
oh,
yeah. Good.
yeah, there we go.
sorry.
Okay.
Right. Perfect.
It's not the world's prettiest thing. But another thing is we're not used to seeing bullet points in our nav, right?
Yeah,
So
remove
in that
that.
nav UL, let's also do list style colon none. And I think a few people in the chat who know me already know where this is going. So this looks lovely, right? This looks lovely. Um,
Yes.
it's pretty. You could slap some different colors, right? Slap your branding on this. But at the end of the day, this is still a nav. And the fact that it's a nav means that it's effectively registered as a hotspot that assistive technologies such as screen readers can skip to. And the fact that it has an unordered list means that assistive technology users, namely screen reader users, will be told how many items are in this list, right? It's great. Except in Safari, when or specifically, I guess I should say, in WebKit, when you remove list styles from a list, Safari no longer semantically exposes that as a list to assistive technology users.
Oh,
So, someone accessing this page using VoiceOver on Safari will no longer be told how many items are in this list. And here's the thing, I actually think that's okay, right? Safari made that decision for a reason, and they made that decision because of user testing, right? So I don't want us to like panic and go, oh, we lost semantics, we can't do this, right? But it is a caveat that's fairly important to know, right? Because if we had, specified a nice little like nav class or something like that that we wanted folks to use from our design system, this is now something that has changed about their semantics that very likely they aren't aware of. Um, and there is a workaround. You can kind of reinstate those list semantics if you go down to your UL on line 27 and you add role equals list. Um, Again, I don't necessarily recommend this. WebKit has its heuristics for a reason, and that reason is specifically to reduce a lot of clutter. However, sometimes we need to override the browser's heuristics. We genuinely feel that this list needs to be exposed as a list, and that would be the better experience for everyone. So we can come back in here and we could add role equals list. But chances are good developers don't know that because most developers not especially knowledgeable about accessibility, about how css can impact accessibility, and specifically how css can even influence semantics,
Yeah.
and then how to fix that,
And
right?
how it works in Safari versus Firefox or
Exactly.
Chrome.
This is what I would consider good to know, but still very specialized knowledge, right? That I personally am not going to just expect people to just know. So, this right here is an opportunity for documentation. And this is the power of the design system because, our nav is lovely. It's going to be the rage, like move over material design. Everything looks like this now,
Mhm.
it's great. Um, but we have knowledge, the three of us building out our excellent design system over here, which is very gorgeous. We have knowledge that is very specialized. And, I'm going to pretend we have user testing behind this too, right? Because we represent the codified institutional knowledge of the design within this system, right? We have far more context. We've done the research, right? We've done the user testing. We know specifically how things are going to work, and we're putting our design system out into the world, just kind of hoping that people are going to be able to take away from it and like make an inclusive experience. And so, I don't think that that is a safe guarantee. I think that sometimes you need to kind of help people along, give them those caveats of like, hey, we have styles that'll give you this nice little flex bulletless list design for your nav, or for any list rather. But to use these, you need to know this extra thing of in WebKit specifically, this is going to impact screen reader experiences. So you should probably be aware of that. And here's how you could fix it. But even then, our guidance is don't rush to immediately fix it. Does that kind of make sense? Like there's a lot of context there, and having the classes and the styles alone isn't enough. We have to also go, here's the extra context and why and when and how to use this.
And actually, in a design system that is component based, uh, likely some developers could just pick up this nav component and just say, okay,
Mhm.
there's three links into it. There's about, mission, careers, and this will be entirely done for them basically, and so they can just
Yeah,
focus on the feature, and all the accessibility features will come with it, and
absolutely.
and any fix on this also will come with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a huge advantage of design systems is that, um, I would actually be very curious to see how y'all define design system because for me, like no one thing is your design system. There's a bunch of like artifacts and institutional knowledge that go into a design system, but it is the knowledge, is the documentation, it is the CSS libraries, it's the component libraries, it's um, the processes, the institutional processes around building and using the system. Like
Yeah.
all of those things are your design system, but having something centralized is really, really huge because not everyone has to know everything. We can benefit from people who do have the specialized knowledge. And then when that knowledge gets updated, because we found out, oops, like we completely forgot about high contrast mode or something like that, we can go back and update it in a centralized way. And when um, consumers update their artifacts, for instance, they'll get the new styles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is exactly how we see design systems as well. And I just brought up the page on our definition of what is a design system. And so we obviously have the design tokens, and we also have the content design, which is really how the
Mhm.
also how the words are used, and they're probably also very important for to be very clear and very consistent. And then those things fill in the design kits on the designer side. So those are also artifacts for the designers to create. And inside the component library, which the engineers will use to replicate or to create the living thing. Um, but all of this needs to live inside the documentation, and I'm still wondering how we can set accessibility inside this, because accessibility is in many different shapes. Definitely in the component library, as you explained, especially with the nav, but also somehow on the content design as well, and
Mhm.
on the design tokens as well, when it comes to color contrast ratios. So your brand colors and contrast needs to be right. Obviously, if you pick up a color that doesn't match with your text, it has to be matched. um, Things like that. But yeah, then definitely all those artifacts needs to match. And the documentation is so central into explaining all those things together.
Absolutely. Yeah, and accessibility is part of this because usability is part of every step along those ways, right? Like accessibility is usability, and
Yeah,
usability permeates everything that we do when we're building experiences for people. So, um, yeah, accessibility is everywhere in here. And it's one of those things that, like, folks are expecting things like color to be handled by a design system, but um, designs I think anyone who's ever received a comp in Figma or InVision or anything like that, um, anyone who's ever received a design comp will tell you that a user interface is not a flat design that you could like print out and put on a poster, right, and hang on the wall, right? It is all sorts of things. It is the responsiveness. It is the interaction. It is the underlying semantics. It is all of these things. And it's not just simply enough to take a pretty design off of Behance or Dribble and just kind of make it so, right? You have to also codify what does it mean to interact with this thing? What speaks could this be in, right? A design for a website is incomplete if it doesn't also include things like what if there's no data in here, right? We show what happens if there's some data. What if there's no data? What if there's an error? What if there's too much data, right? um, all of those things. And so accessibility is part of completing that whole system of documenting not just what happens when you click this button, but what should this button announce to a screen reader, right? Where if you open a modal using this button, where does the focus go, right? You should have standardized rules for these
yeah,
because chances are really good your developers don't have that specialized knowledge or they aren't thinking about it. They're like trying to make it look good and look as close to the design system as possible, but they're not necessarily focused on making it behave as closely to the design system. So you have to codify the interaction, um, just so that we can get that consistency. Because consistency is how we get predictability, and predictability is how we get usability. So codifying those things, explaining like providing, hey, when you click this, focus goes here. That has to be part of how we document our interactions in our design system too.
yeah. I mean, and it is hard. It is very hard.
Mhm.
I have to, I'm very far from being an accessibility specialist, and but I just know a few things, and even the few things I know, I miss them. Sometimes, or even most of the time, I'm ready for my mea culpa, but it's very hard to have them built in your way of developing, and
Mhm.
this is uh, this is something I will really want to find some sort of cheat sheet
Mhm.
that will tell me, either it is like a checklist that comes in on PRs, and say, okay, is that checked? Is that checked? Especially when you build a dialogue, can this checklist come in and tell you, did you did that? Did you do that? Etc. Etc. Or it should be a manual list, or I'm looking at how best this could be applied into everything we do.
Absolutely. And so it definitely starts with having like rules that are fairly predictable, right? Like, I mean, it starts everywhere. It starts with having documentation. It starts with having rules. A common one for design systems to talk about and think about is colors, right? I'm sure y'all love colors and figuring out how best to use those. And so that comes with it the natural challenge of when can you use certain colors and how do those colors interact with other colors? I've brought up quite a few times color contrast. And first of all, having tools to analyze a color contrast ratio are huge. I personally tend to use the color contrast checker by WebAIM, which I can put a link to in the chat if y'all would like. Does Backlight have anything for color contrast?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
It's on the list. Definitely
Oh,
the color contrast and we actually have. I mean, we do have something. Let me put it out. No, we used to have something, and this is something that needs to come back. But also, we would like to add something that Storybook also had in an add-on that where you can control also the different color contrast,
mhm.
given the different visions that you could have. I think everybody is talking about red and green.
Yeah.
Vision difficulties, but it's not the only disability that you can have.
Mhm.
There's the different color blindness, and so we would like to add that also, so that in one click, right where you are building your component, you can check that. Um, yeah, it's we strongly believe that as
Mhm.
much as you can get right away, one key away or one click of the mouse away,
Mhm.
it's a bigger chance that we will look at it and check it and fix it.
Mhm. So, I've put a link to the color contrast checker I end up using by WebAIM, but you can build systems around color contrast ratios. One of my friends, Mike Aparicio, has taught me something that I absolutely love, which is when you name your colored tokens, you can name them on the like 100, 200, all the way to 900 scale. And the way he does it is he says 600 is what you would treat as like the main color, right? Like that is the canonical version of that color. That is your brand color. And the way he builds his color scales is that 200. So like the 100 and 200 colors, those are the light versions of those colors. Um, he designs the scales such that the 600 version of a color always meets color contrast requirements against the 200 version of the color. And that
Mm.
itself is a fairly simple rule, right? All of a sudden, like I've just communicated to you something incredibly simple, which is it is always safe to pair a 600 and a 200. And that means it's also always safe to pair a 600 and a 100. That's really memorable, right?
Yeah,
And
and
it feels.
you
Go
can
ahead.
even code review it because
Yeah.
you know it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so having that like now as like that's a simply communicatable rule that you can put in your documentation. And now like folks can use colors fairly safely without worrying about like, hey, how are these things going to intersect with each other? Right. How is this going to look against this? And I really love that. And that is something that design systems absolutely have the capability of doing is
Yeah,
establishing those kinds of scales and systems and rules and heuristics and whatever fancy word you want to use for that rules of thumb that someone who like I don't spend my day like concerned with every aspect outside my window. I'm getting some
Yeah.
sirens. uh, that but yeah, having those rules of thumb baked into the system that are easily memorable empowers people who build with that system to build without even having to know like what ratios they're trying to meet. It abstracts things away into easily memorable rules of thumb so that you don't have to worry about the underlying targets or even the rationale. You just know it's safe to pair a 600 and a 200.
yeah.
um, I love that so much. It's incredibly cool and such a for me concrete way that design systems can improve my quality of life.
Yeah, it's true, and both on from a user standpoint, but also from a developer experience, because it's less
Yeah.
headache about searching and finding out and making sure of like, well, when you know that this is how it should be, and that's it.
Mhm.
That's exactly what I find so powerful with design system is that we came from something that is coming from the design side and telling, okay, design system is what makes your brand unique. It's a way to have a personal way to talk to your end users. But now that developers start to really handle the design system thing, we are trying to transform it into something that we could really use to burn our rules, burn our best practices, which means accessibility, which means addressing performances issues, responsiveness, and
Hmm.
just to improve the way we're giving the best user experience we can to our
Hmm.
final user by improving the developer experience. So this is really this is so powerful tool, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know. One of the things I felt as I was like coming into the stream is that accessibility itself is such a huge subject, right? And design systems, I think, are also a huge subject, right? It's like hard to hone in on like what are some clear examples without like trying to do everything. So if I can, I guess, kind of hone down maybe the three things. Like if you're starting out building a design system and you're trying to figure out like what are the ways that I can go ahead and start making start using this design system to empower people to create accessible inclusive experiences, there's a couple things that I would recommend. First of all, color. We've talked about color contrast ratio. Building a scale like that 600/200 system, incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So color is a huge one. A second one that I would point to is typography, right? Design systems have such a huge influence over how our content is laid out, how it's spaced, font sizing, stuff like that. Get typography right. Make sure your typography is readable. You've got a good line height. Um, you should probably divorce your font sizing and stuff like that from the underlying semantics. This is one of the few times where I'm actually like, you should totally divorce these two things because in accessibility spaces, like the H1 typically represents the like title of the page in a way, right? But it's not necessarily the largest heading. It's the most important heading, but it's not necessarily the largest heading. I at my previous role, I worked on a page that had a really minuscule H1 that was like your account name, and then the different sections of the page were labeled with H2s. But because you already knew your account name, the H2s were far bigger and more important than the account title, which was your H1. So have a system for type scale and fonts and stuff like that, and divorce it from the underlying semantics. Because what you don't want, again, design systems are all about ensuring people fall into the pit of success. It should be really easy to build an accessible, inclusive website by accident, and really hard to mess things up, even on purpose. And so divorce your concept of font sizing from the underlying semantics, so that people aren't trying to use an H1 to mean big, important text, but rather
Yeah.
using it to mean this is the title of the page, which is different there. So typography is the second big thing. And then the third big thing is getting a hold of your interactive states. And so these are largely going to be things like your hover state, your focus state, your active and inactive state, your disabled state, right? A design system that doesn't show how these things look when they're disabled or unusable, or not in use, is incomplete, right?
Mm.
A design system that doesn't show what things look like when they're being focused on by the keyboard is incomplete because, again, your users are using keyboards. And if you're not describing what their interaction is like, that's incomplete. Um, and so document or have classes for it or something. Make sure your design system in some way codifies how interaction is. Those are maybe the three main things I would indicate for leveraging design systems for accessible experiences. Again, those are getting your colors right, getting your typography right, and then getting your interaction right.
Oh,
Um,
that's great. And that makes me feel better about the fact that those are maybe the only three things I know. So they're probably important.
And then once you get there, once you start getting this kind of systematic approach, then you can start to think about things like, okay, what should the screen reader output be, right? Where should the keyboard focus go? Again, that kind of gets to the more like the complexities of more complex experiences, right? It's not enough to put a row of pretty buttons on a page, right? But also talk about how those buttons are used. Because again, part of your design system is going to be when a button opens a modal, and that modal has a few buttons, for instance, an OK button and a cancel button and a close button. what are the orders of those buttons, right? Do you go left to right, and what was the order there? You know, so all of those things you start to build onto those, but you do that through your user testing, right? And it's difficult to enforce, but what's difficult to enforce, you document.
Yeah, that's really really clever. And thanks for the reminder of the best thing and the most important things in terms of accessibility. This is something that we really need to repeat and repeat and repeat again. But
Mhm.
yeah, definitely. I guess we're running a little bit out of time, so I still have a lot of things in mind, but maybe for the next episode, if you're okay with
We'll,
that.
we'll do a round two. I'm good with that. I would love to do some more with this because we've only scratched the surface, I think. But
Yeah,
um, yeah, it's
Yeah,
accessibility is everywhere, and so is design because accessibility is design. And so,
and
yeah,
one thing I was thinking, Ben, and I don't know if you are interested, but I was maybe thinking doing a round of like picking up the best design systems out there in terms of
okay,
documentation and looking at how they defined accessibility inside them, and maybe
absolutely.
try to say, okay, this is good, this is clever, this is something to pick up, and
Mhm.
so kind of highlighting the best practices that we can see all over the place. That would
Mhm.
be lovely to do that with you. Um,
Absolutely. Do you mean now or like some future time?
no, not on the next
Next
session.
time,
yeah,
yeah.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So it's what I'll leave you with now on that is I firmly believe that accessibility knowledge is best conveyed when it's integrated into the rest of your system. I think that this is the thing I've seen when I'm like educating people is that like when you single out accessibility as its own subject, folks tend to see it as kind of its optional, like see it as an optional external thing that
Yeah.
maybe they don't have to worry about but the accessibility specialists worry about like right like oh we let Ben worry about that part right it's its own
Yeah.
thing
Yeah,
but accessibility expertise is best taught when it's incorporated into the rest of the work and so what I can tell you now is that I think the best documentation for conveying accessibility specialized knowledge is going to be the documentation that incorporates that into all of their other documentation.
Mm.
perfect. Um, I guess we're done for today.
All right.
And it was really awesome. You've got your own show in something like what, 2 hours? That's it, something like that.
uh An hour and a half,
In
yes.
an hour and a
So I
half.
host, if for anyone interested, I host a weekly show called Some Antics. That's on Twitter at Semantics.dev, which Matt has just put the link to in the chat. Thank you so much. It is a weekly show where I bring on guests from around web development and web design to teach something about building great user experiences for the web in a hands-on way with a focus on accessibility and core web technologies. So if you're into this kind of stuff of design and accessibility, you'll also be interested in that show as well. Today, in an hour and a half, I have Dave Rupert on. Dave is a part of a working group called Open UI,
Yeah.
which is a group that's working to enhance HTML's semantics to allow for more flexible, customizable experiences. So the you as designers, you've likely wanted to be able to style a select element for a long time, and that's finally coming thanks to the select menu element which only came about because of the research of OpenUI. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff and the future of semantics on the web, please come join me on the show, Some Antics, today. And I would be happy to have y'all.
Yeah,
Awesome.
definitely.
Mhm.
We'll be there. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you very much for being with us today. It was as you said, we just scratched the surface, but it
Mhm.
was really really cool to have you.
Absolutely. And we look
Yeah,
forward for the next one, Ben.
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah,
for
thank you so
sure.
much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Y'all are great to talk to. So I really appreciated the chance to come on.
Oh, well, it's our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for everything, and see you next week, folks, for a next episode.
Absolutely.
See you
Bye,
later.
y'all.
See you
Bye bye.
soon. Bye bye.